Alright, you freaky hippies, so here's where we're at. Alternator is replaced and is now charging at 14.7 volts, and the AC compressor is replaced. And it's making cold, and you can hear the fan thing. The pressure's a little low. I feel like I gotta adjust the level of hooch, whatever that stuff is. So far we're okay. As it's warming up, it just started it a minute ago or so. What's our coolant temperature at? By the way, it's glad to have you back. It's quite a few days later because I got sidetracked by a bunch of stuff, but we're going to see if we can diagnose this ridiculous thing. Let's look at engine coolant temperature while we're here. Okay, so we're at 152, and that's going to be climbing. Yeah, thermostat's not open yet. Engine is running beautifully. Let's see how she revs. I didn't even bother to, I didn't have time to do this last time because I had no charging and no AC. No check engine light, but that doesn't surprise me because the battery was disconnected. Feels normal, not misfiring, running very smooth, tick-free. How is it possible this engine has 750,000 miles on it? I don't know. I'm suspicious of that. It's too nice for that. Well, it is a 2020, but whatever. All right, so our engine coolant is 161. It's making heat. I could pop this bleeder and see if the thermostat's open. I don't care. I'll let it get hot of its own accord. So what changed? Right now it's not running rich. Now of course it's just started up, so it's in open loop, which means the engine is warming up and it has a special protocol for that cycle as it enriches the mixture to get the engine up to temperature as fast as possible, which is emissions and drivability and so on. But once it gets into closed loop, that means it's listening to the oxygen sensors and adjusting the fuel accordingly. And my guess is once it gets into open loop or closed loop, that's when it's going to code for being rich. What does it think it's at right now in this, while I have the time? Let's look at the injector pulse width and see how much fuel it's putting in. Okay, so we're in the general, this is about the right range for a running engine, 1500 microseconds, something like that. We're going to see if that changes. That's about anywhere between 1500, at least on this tool, and 2200, 2300s are more or less normal because it's trimming the fuel to do what it wants to do. And those numbers are dropping. So it's getting richer and richer and richer. Yeah, I bet it's, but they're all about even with each other, so it's, okay, now let's see if it's thrown a code yet, because I would call that too low. Yep, okay. So the only code we have is intake air temperature sensor. That's because that tube is off and it's unplugged. I don't care about that. And that wouldn't affect it anyway. It's at 201. Let's keep watching it. As you know, or may not know, normal is this thing is seeking 204, and it will, but it will go up as high as 230 before it kicks the fans on. And that's how it regulates once the thermostat is fully open. And I can tell you it is fully open because the bottle is hot. Those lines are hot. The heater core lines are hot. And what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that the thermostat is fully open and it regulates with the fan. Now it's because it's not doing any work. It's not getting much hotter. And I would turn on the air conditioner to make it do more work, but that'll force the fan on and that'll make it artificially cold. As you know, I'm just talking really to hear myself. Talking my way through this. You're witness to my internal monologue. I'm going to look at the actual readout from the oxygen sensors because before, yeah, we have a bad oxygen sensor. That's way too high. It should be, as I graph this, these two oxygen sensors should be swinging between 0.1 and 0.8 volts. And oxygen sensor 1, which is in the rear, is, but oxygen sensor 2 isn't. It's at 3 volts. So it's reading, I forget which way the voltage works, but there, if I look at it, maybe there? Yeah, that's way out of whack. So do I have a bad wire on the front oxygen sensor? Because the short to ground would do that. All right, here's a diagnostic for you, you little fuckers. So you would expect, yeah, that's way too high. So you would expect it to be putting in, if the front oxygen sensor was crazy different from the rear, you would expect the fuel injectors on that bank to be either putting in way more or way less fuel on that bank. So if I find that the fuel injectors are still all putting out equally, I could more or less say that there's something wrong with that oxygen sensor. In other words, yeah, those are good numbers, 2400s, and all of them are the same. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Yeah, you are. So that tells me that the reason the engine is running so smoothly and nicely is that it's running smoothly and nicely, and that oxygen sensor is putting out bad data. The computer is being smart enough to ignore that data. I just had a good idea. I was going to unplug that oxygen sensor. When the computer can't, at least I've noticed in this vehicle, when the computer can't communicate with an oxygen sensor, what it does is it copies the data. It copies the data from the other oxygen sensor to it. In other words, it assumes that the engine is even, and that would make sense. It's interesting, I can hear that fan spinning down. I wonder if we have an old fan problem. So, all right, so in the final stage of your silly diagnostic is that you would think to yourself, well, what are the odds? What would explain it if I change the oxygen sensor and the data doesn't change? Because I would imagine, I'd have to imagine, the oxygen sensors are not always binary things. Some of their test criteria take some time. You may have noticed when you replace an oxygen sensor, it takes 50 miles or whatever to complete the readiness test so you can get it through E-check, because it has some time and running and distance and all that shit based parameters on it. So anyway, the point being is if I go in and I chunk up and I do the hard work and I replace an oxygen sensor and it wasn't the oxygen sensor, what would I expect? I guess I would, this is a little bit uncharted territory, but what would you expect? Well, one, you would expect that the reason it was giving you a wrong reading was there was a wiring issue and it wasn't the sensor to begin with. And I suppose that would be high resistance wire, although you would think that would result in low voltage, but it depends on where in the system it was. You would then trace back the wiring, although this van and this computer is pretty good about knowing the difference between when it gets garbage from a sensor, it does some testing of its wire, it knows. In this case, the code it did not throw a code for oxygen sensor 2 of 1 voltage high. I would have to look up the criteria for that code and see how long if there's any sort of time or environmental basis on it. But at this point, I believe the thing to do, the path forward would be to fix the intake air temperature sensor, which I don't think is a factor, but it needs fixed. You want that will light the light eventually. That's an easy fix. And fix that, get the Freon level set just so it works. I mean, put a compressor on it, why not have it work? Yeah, and then tackle that as an oxygen sensor. What else? Why else wouldn't you? It's giving it the right amount of fuel. It's got compression and timing and all that happy ass horse shit. Yeah, oxygen sensor. That's actually kind of a problem for me because these oxygen sensors weld themselves into the cat, and it is going to take some muscle to get it. Luckily, I suppose, is that the front oxygen sensor is generally easier to get to than the rear one, and I can get a pretty good swing on it with like a 2.5 foot bar. I might be able to get it out of there, but what a real mechanic does is has an expensive tool called an induction heater where he gets it super hot electrically with an electric coil rather than an open flame. I can put flame on it, but I'm gonna light the whole fucking house on fire, and that'll usually soften it up. Well, I guess that's a battle I'll have to fight. The cat that's on there looks pretty old, and it's dented at the bottom, but it doesn't look like it would be dented enough to affect flow. In theory, if the cat was smashed or the exhaust was restricted or something like that, it would result in wonky numbers from that one oxygen sensor. But I don't see enough evidence on the cat itself to say that that's the issue. I suppose what I could do is I could take the cat off and put it on the bench, and then I can get a swing at it with a really long bar. But goddamn, that's a pain in the ass. And if those two exhaust bolts break in the head, then you got a whole new problem. We'll see. Anyway, so that's the update for this video. That wasn't very entertaining at all. There was no fire. Nobody died. All right, well, we'll see what happens in part 3. Fuck. Here I was looking at a huge payday. This was going to be I was going to do this engine swap and take a week off. This is good for everybody. Whatever. Love you. Bye. She's a goddamn lovely man.